"Move," I said, "move." Victoria Sterling screamed and pointed her finger aggressively at the black woman, Dr. Amelia Washington, her voice cutting through the peaceful first-class cabin like a siren. "My daughter wants the window seat, and you're in her way." The entire cabin fell silent. Business travelers looked up from their laptops. A couple in row 3 stopped mid-conversation. All eyes turned toward the unfolding drama. 14-year-old Chloe Sterling stepped up beside her mother and nodded enthusiastically. "Mom's right, I always get the window seat in first class," she declared with shocking entitlement. Dr. Washington looked up calmly from her laptop and responded in a steady, professional voice. "I'm sorry, but this is my assigned seat." Victoria's face turned red with rage. "Do you see my daughter? She's just a child. Move to another seat." Her voice grew louder with each word, causing passengers throughout the cabin to turn and stare. Chloe crossed her arms and delivered the words that made everyone's blood run cold. "Yeah, people like you should be more respectful to kids," she said smugly, the racist undertone unmistakable. Dr. Washington remained perfectly composed, but the tension in the air became electric. Other passengers began pulling out their phones. Someone whispered, "Are you recording this?" The peaceful flight had transformed into a powder keg of confrontation. Flight attendant Rachel Martinez appeared, walking quickly up the aisle with nervous energy radiating from every step. She had dealt with difficult passengers before, but nothing had prepared her for what she was about to witness. But here's what nobody on that plane knew. Dr. Washington wasn't just any passenger. She wasn't just any businesswoman trying to get to Chicago for a meeting. She was someone with the power to change lives in an instant. And Victoria Sterling was about to discover exactly who she had been screaming at. What happened next shocked everyone to their core and turned this entitled mother's world completely upside down. Before I tell you how this incredible story unfolds, smash that subscribe button, because you absolutely do not want to miss the jaw-dropping twist that's coming. Trust me, what you're about to see will leave you speechless. If you stand against injustice and prejudice, comment yes and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. You will definitely get a heartwarming reply from Living Stories. Now, before we dive deeper into this explosive confrontation, you need to understand exactly who these people were and what brought them to this moment. Because the identities of everyone involved made what happened next absolutely mind-blowing. Let me start with the woman sitting calmly in seat 2A, the target of all this rage and entitlement. Dr. Amelia Washington was 45 years old, and everything about her radiated quiet power and sophistication. She wore an elegant business suit that was perfectly tailored, her hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, and she carried herself with the kind of calm confidence that came from years of overcoming impossible odds. But here's what made Dr. Washington truly remarkable. She was completely self-made. This woman had built her empire from absolutely nothing. Yet somehow, through sheer determination and brilliant business instincts, she had transformed herself into the CEO of Washington Enterprises, a multi-million-dollar company that she had built from the ground up. She was worth over $500 million, owned luxury hotels across the country, and was recognized as one of the most successful businesswomen in America. Dr. Washington specifically chose window seats on flights because she used every minute of travel time for work. She had learned that the natural light helped her focus, and being away from aisle traffic meant fewer interruptions. On this particular Tuesday morning, she was flying to Chicago for what could be the biggest business deal of her career, worth over $50 million. Her laptop was open to financial projections and market analysis reports. She had spent weeks preparing for this meeting, and everything needed to be perfect. Little did she know that the biggest challenge of her day wouldn't come from the boardroom, but from the entitled woman screaming at her in seat 2A. Now let's talk about Victoria Sterling, the 42-year-old woman causing this scene. Victoria was everything you'd expect from someone who had never heard the word no in her entire life. She wore designer clothes worth more than most people's monthly salaries. Her blonde hair was styled to perfection, and she moved through the world with the absolute certainty that everyone around her existed to serve her desires. Victoria ran a company called Sterling Marketing, and on the surface, it looked successful. Nice office, expensive furniture, prestigious clients. But the truth was far different. Victoria's business was struggling financially, hemorrhaging money month after month. She was terrible at managing people, even worse at managing money, and she had built her entire business model around intimidating people into giving her what she wanted. Her strategy had always been simple: throw her weight around, make threats, demand to speak to managers, and eventually wear people down until they gave in. She used her money, her connections, and let's be honest, her race as weapons to get her way. Victoria genuinely believed that being white and wealthy gave her automatic superiority over people like Dr. Washington. The most disturbing part? Victoria had passed every single one of these toxic attitudes down to her 14-year-old daughter, Chloe. This child had been raised to believe that the world owed her everything, that other people existed to serve her needs, and that certain types of people should automatically defer to her wishes. Chloe Sterling was dressed in expensive teen fashion that probably cost more than most families spent on clothing in an entire year. She attended an elite private school where she was surrounded by other wealthy, privileged children who reinforced her sense of superiority. She had never been told no in her entire life, never faced real consequences for her behavior, and never learned that other people had rights and feelings that mattered. Chloe was constantly on social media, documenting every moment of her privileged life for her followers. She recorded everything, posted constantly, and genuinely believed that her lifestyle made her better than other people. At 14 years old, she had already internalized deeply racist attitudes and felt completely comfortable expressing them in public. The most chilling part was how naturally the prejudice flowed from both mother and daughter. This wasn't learned behavior from movies or books. This was hatred that had been carefully cultivated and passed down, normalized in their household until it felt as natural as breathing. Then there was Rachel Martinez, the flight attendant who was about to make the biggest mistake of her career. Rachel had been working for Summit Airlines for 5 years, and she prided herself on keeping passengers happy and avoiding confrontations. She was 32 years old, hardworking, and genuinely cared about providing good customer service. But Rachel had learned the wrong lesson from her years in the airline industry. She had been trained to believe that keeping wealthy, demanding passengers happy was more important than standing up for what was right. She had seen too many situations where flight attendants were blamed for not accommodating difficult customers, and she was terrified of losing her job. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose everyone's true character and change multiple lives forever. Victoria thought she held all the power because of her race and her willingness to make a scene. Chloe believed her mother's behavior would get them what they wanted because it always had before. Rachel hoped she could find a solution that avoided conflict and kept her job secure. But Dr. Washington? She was about to teach everyone on that flight a lesson about assumptions, respect, and the consequences of showing your true character in public. The woman they were harassing and dismissing was about to reveal herself as someone with more power than any of them could possibly imagine. It was a Tuesday morning, and passengers had settled into their seats aboard what should have been a routine 2-hour flight from Atlanta to Chicago. The first-class cabin was filled with the usual mix of business travelers and vacationing families who had splurged on the premium seats. The atmosphere was calm, peaceful even. Flight attendants made their final preparations, passengers stowed their carry-on bags, and everyone seemed ready for a smooth journey ahead. But in seat 2A, the coveted window seat in the very first row of first class, sat Dr. Amelia Washington. At 45 years old, Dr. Washington carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from years of overcoming obstacles and building something extraordinary from nothing. She was dressed in a business suit, her hair pulled back into a sophisticated bun, and she had already pulled out her laptop, preparing to use the flight time to review important documents for a crucial meeting that awaited her in Chicago. Dr. Washington had specifically chosen seat 2A when she booked her ticket 3 weeks earlier. As someone who traveled frequently for business, she knew that window seats provided the perfect environment for uninterrupted work, away from the aisle traffic and with natural light for reading. She had paid the premium price for first class, just like every other passenger in this section, and she looked forward to a productive flight. But her peaceful moment was about to be shattered. Just 2 rows behind her, Victoria Sterling made her way down the aisle with her 14-year-old daughter, Chloe. Victoria was the kind of woman who commanded attention the moment she entered a room, though not always for the right reasons. She wore designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she carried herself with the unmistakable air of someone who was used to getting exactly what she wanted, exactly when she wanted it. Victoria's daughter, Chloe, was a carbon copy of her mother in many ways. Despite being only 14, she already displayed that same entitled attitude, that same expectation that the world should bend to her desires. She clutched her phone, probably planning to document every moment of their first-class experience for her social media followers, because in her world, if it wasn't posted online, did it really happen? As Victoria and Chloe approached their assigned seats, 4A and 4B, Chloe glanced toward the front of the cabin and spotted Dr. Washington in that coveted window seat. Her face immediately scrunched up in disappointment. "Mom," Chloe whined, tugging on Victoria's designer sleeve, "I wanted the window seat. You know I always get the window seat when we fly first class." Victoria followed her daughter's gaze and saw Dr. Washington, a black woman, sitting calmly in seat 2A, completely unaware of the storm that was about to descend upon her. Now, here was where a normal parent might have explained to their child that other people also paid for their seats, that you couldn't always get what you wanted, and that part of growing up was learning to accept disappointment gracefully. But Victoria Sterling was not a normal parent. Victoria Sterling was the kind of person who believed that her money, her status, and let's be honest, her race, gave her the right to rearrange the world according to her preferences. Without hesitation, Victoria marched straight up to Dr. Washington's seat. Her voice cut through the peaceful cabin atmosphere like a knife through silk. "Excuse me," Victoria said, though her tone was anything but polite. "I need you to move." Dr. Washington looked up from her laptop, probably thinking this was some kind of mistake, maybe a mix-up with seat assignments. She responded with the kind of polite professionalism that came naturally to successful business leaders. "I'm sorry, but this is my assigned seat," Dr. Washington said calmly, gesturing to her boarding pass. But Victoria wasn't interested in boarding passes or seat assignments or basic courtesy. She was only interested in getting what she wanted. "I said move!" Victoria's voice rose dramatically, causing heads to turn throughout the first-class cabin. "My daughter wants the window seat and you're in her way." She wasn't talking about a medical emergency or a family trying to sit together. This was a grown woman demanding that another paying passenger give up their specifically chosen seat, simply because her teenage daughter preferred it. The audacity was breathtaking. But it got worse, so much worse. Chloe, emboldened by her mother's aggressive stance, stepped up beside Victoria and nodded enthusiastically. "Mom's right. I always get the window seat in first class," she declared with the kind of casual entitlement that would have made your jaw drop. Now, Dr. Washington had been in situations like this before. As a successful black businesswoman, she had encountered her share of people who thought they could intimidate her, dismiss her, or treat her as less than equal. But she had learned that the best response to such behavior was calm, dignified resistance. "I'm sorry, but this is my assigned seat," she repeated, her voice steady and professional. Victoria's face turned red now, and her voice got even louder. "Do you see my daughter? She's just a child. Move to another seat." The irony here was staggering. Victoria was using her daughter's youth as justification for this outrageous demand, as if being 14 somehow granted you the right to other people's property. But here was what she didn't realize. She was teaching her daughter that the world owed her something, that other people existed to serve her desires, and most dangerously, that certain types of people should automatically defer to her wishes. And then Chloe spoke, and her words revealed just how deeply these toxic attitudes had taken root. "Yeah, people like you should be more respectful to kids," Chloe said smugly, her arms crossed over her chest. The other passengers in first class started to take notice now. Business travelers looked up from their newspapers and laptops. An elderly couple in row 3 exchanged concerned glances. Someone in the back pulled out their phone, and you could probably guess why. In today's world, moments like this didn't stay private for long. Dr. Washington remained remarkably composed, but you could see in her eyes that she recognized exactly what was happening here. This wasn't really about a window seat. This was about power, privilege, and the assumption that she, as a black woman, should automatically submit to the demands of white customers. The tension in the cabin became palpable. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to intervene or mind their own business. The peaceful atmosphere of the flight had been completely shattered by Victoria's outrageous behavior. What would you have done if you witnessed this scene? Would you have spoken up for Dr. Washington? Would you have told Victoria that her behavior was completely unacceptable? Or would you have sat quietly and hoped someone else handled it? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button now, because honestly, this was the kind of situation that revealed a lot about who we really were. Other passengers were now openly staring, some recording with their phones, others whispering among themselves about the shocking display they witnessed. The woman in seat 3B leaned over to her husband and whispered, "Can you believe this is happening?" A businessman in row 5 shook his head in disgust and reached for his phone. Victoria, completely oblivious to how her behavior was being perceived and recorded, continued her verbal assault. She was so focused on getting what she wanted that she couldn't see the bigger picture. She couldn't see that she was exposing herself and her daughter as exactly the kind of people that society was learning to reject and hold accountable. The tension that had already filled the first-class cabin was about to explode into something far worse. What started as an outrageous demand was about to escalate into blatant racism, and Dr. Washington was about to face a level of discrimination that would shock everyone watching. Victoria Sterling wasn't done with her demands, not even close. She planted her feet firmly in the aisle and crossed her arms, preparing for what she clearly thought would be an easy victory. "My daughter always gets the window seat," Victoria declared, her voice dripping with entitlement. "It's tradition. Every single time we fly first class, Chloe gets the window seat. That's just how it works." Dr. Washington looked up from her laptop with the patience of someone who had dealt with unreasonable people countless times before. "I understand, but I purchased this specific seat," she replied politely, gesturing to her boarding pass. "I selected 2A when I booked my ticket 3 weeks ago." But Chloe Sterling was not interested in reasonable explanations or purchase tickets. The 14-year-old immediately launched into the kind of whining that would make your skin crawl. "But I want to take pictures," Chloe complained, stamping her foot like a toddler. "The window seat is mine. I always post pictures from the window seat. My followers expect it." Can you believe this? A 14-year-old genuinely believed that her social media content was more important than another passenger's purchased seat. But it gets so much worse. Victoria, seeing that polite demands weren't working, decided to escalate her tactics. She leaned down toward Dr. Washington, invading her personal space in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. "Don't you think a child's happiness is more important than your stubbornness?" Victoria asked, her voice taking on a condescending tone that made it clear she thought she was speaking to someone beneath her. Think about the audacity of that question for a moment. Victoria was essentially arguing that her daughter's wants should automatically override another passenger's rights, simply because Chloe was 14 years old. As if being young somehow granted you ownership of other people's property. Dr. Washington's response was perfect. Firm, dignified, and absolutely final. "I'm not moving from my purchased seat," she stated clearly, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades refusing to back down from bullies. That's when Victoria Sterling showed her true colors. That's when the mask came completely off and revealed the racist hatred that had been bubbling beneath the surface. "This is exactly what's wrong with your people," Victoria snarled, her voice rising loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "No consideration. No respect for families. No understanding of how things work." The phrase, "your people," hit the cabin like a slap. Every passenger within earshot knew exactly what Victoria meant. This wasn't about window seats anymore. This was about race, power, and a white woman who believed that black people should automatically defer to her demands. Dr. Washington's face remained composed, but you could see the steel in her eyes. She had heard those words before, faced that kind of hatred before, but it never stopped being painful and infuriating. But Chloe Sterling was just getting started. This privileged teenager pulled out her phone and started recording, apparently thinking that documenting her own racist behavior was somehow a good idea. "I'm posting this entitled woman on my story," Chloe announced loudly, making sure Dr. Washington could hear every word. "My followers need to see how some people act when children ask them nicely for something." The irony was staggering. Chloe was calling Dr. Washington entitled, while literally demanding that a stranger give up their purchased seat for her convenience. She was recording what she thought was Dr. Washington's bad behavior, but she was actually creating evidence of her own racism and entitlement. Victoria, emboldened by her daughter's recording, decided to appeal to the other passengers. She turned around and addressed the cabin like she was some kind of victim seeking justice. "Can you believe this?" Victoria called out to the other first-class passengers. "A child asked nicely. A simple request from a 14-year-old girl, and this woman refuses to show basic kindness." The other passengers were looking increasingly uncomfortable. Some were clearly disgusted by what they were witnessing. Others were pulling out their own phones, realizing that they were watching something that needed to be documented. The businessman in row 5 shook his head in disbelief. The elderly couple in row 3 exchanged horrified glances. Dr. Washington maintained her composure throughout this circus, but her next words cut through the chaos like a sword. "Your daughter can learn that she can't have everything she wants," Dr. Washington said calmly. "That's called growing up, and it's clearly something that's long overdue." Those words hit Victoria like a physical blow. How dare this black woman suggest that her precious daughter needed to learn anything? How dare she imply that the Sterling family's parenting was somehow flawed? Victoria's response revealed the depth of her racist beliefs and her complete inability to see Dr. Washington as an equal human being. "Don't tell me how to raise my daughter," Victoria screamed, her face turning red with rage. "You people have no business telling us anything. You have no right to lecture me about parenting." There it was again. "You people." Victoria had now used racist language twice in front of a cabin full of witnesses, and she was being recorded from multiple angles. But she was so consumed with getting her way that she couldn't see the trap she was building for herself. If you were in Dr. Washington's shoes, what would you have done? Will you give up your seat for the entitled daughter, or will you stand your ground and maintain your seat? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and share this story with others. The situation had become so heated and uncomfortable that flight attendant Rachel Martinez finally felt she had to intervene. Rachel approached the scene with visible nervousness, clearly hoping she could defuse the situation before it got any worse. Is everything okay here? Rachel asked, though it was obvious to everyone that nothing about this situation was okay. Victoria immediately seized on Rachel's presence as validation for her position. She turned to the flight attendant with the expectant look of someone who is absolutely certain that authority would side with her. This woman is refusing to give a child the window seat, Victoria announced dramatically, pointing at Dr. Washington, like she was reporting a crime. My daughter specifically requested the window seat, and this passenger is being completely unreasonable. Now, this was Rachel's moment of truth. This was the moment when she could have stood up for what was right, defended a passenger who was being harassed, and shut down the racist behavior that was poisoning the cabin atmosphere. Instead, Rachel made the worst possible choice. "Ma'am, perhaps we could find you another first-class seat?" Rachel said to Dr. Washington, her voice apologetic, but her message clear. She was asking the victim of harassment to move rather than addressing the people causing the problem. Dr. Washington's response was measured but firm. "I specifically booked 2A. I'm not moving." That should have been the end of it. A passenger had purchased a specific seat, was sitting in that seat, and had no obligation to move for someone else's convenience. But Chloe Sterling decided to turn up the drama even further. The 14-year-old suddenly burst into fake tears, the kind of manipulative crying that spoiled children use when they're not getting their way. "She's being mean to me," Chloe wailed, making sure her tears were visible to everyone around her. "I just wanted the window seat. Why is she being so mean to a kid?" Victoria seized on her daughter's performance like it was evidence of a crime. "See?" Victoria said to Rachel, gesturing at her crying daughter. "You're making a child cry. This woman's stubbornness is literally making a child cry. Make her move." And that's when Rachel Martinez made the decision that would end her career. Pressured by Victoria's demands and Chloe's fake tears, Rachel caved completely to the harassment and racism she was witnessing. "Ma'am, company policy prioritizes passenger comfort," Rachel said to Dr. Washington, her voice betraying her nervousness about what she was doing. "Company policy? What company policy says that black passengers should give up their seats when white passengers demand them? What policy prioritizes the comfort of racists over the rights of paying customers?" But Rachel wasn't done. She was about to make it even worse. "I really need to ask you to relocate for the child," Rachel said, the words coming out of her mouth like she could hardly believe she was saying them. The cabin fell silent. Other passengers couldn't believe what they were hearing. A flight attendant was actually asking a black passenger to give up her purchased seat because a white family was demanding it. In 2025, on a commercial airline. Victoria's face lit up with triumph. She had won. Her tactics of intimidation, racism, and manipulation had worked exactly as they always did. "Finally," Victoria exclaimed, clapping her hands together. "Someone with common sense. Thank you for handling this properly." But Dr. Washington wasn't moving. Instead, she stood up slowly, and there was something in her posture, something in her expression, that should have warned everyone that they were making a terrible mistake. "You're both making a serious mistake," Dr. Washington said quietly, her voice carrying a weight and authority that filled the cabin. Other passengers were now openly recording the scene. Phones were out throughout the first-class section. The businessman in row 5 was live streaming. The elderly couple was taking photos. Someone in the back was recording a video. This moment was being captured from every possible angle. Dr. Washington reached into her briefcase and pulled out a business card. The simple gesture somehow carried more threat than all of Victoria's screaming and Rachel's nervous policy citations. "You might want to know who you're dealing with," Dr. Washington said calmly, holding the card where both Victoria and Rachel could see it. Victoria barely glanced at the card, too caught up in her victory to pay attention to details. "I don't care who you think you are," Victoria said dismissively. "The flight attendant has spoken. You need to move, now." But Rachel looked at the card and her face went white. Her hands started shaking. Her mouth fell open. because what she saw on that card was about to change everything. The confrontation that Victoria thought she had won was about to become the biggest mistake of her life. The flight attendant, who thought she was following company policy, was about to discover that she had just enabled racism against the most powerful person on the plane. Dr. Washington stood in the aisle, calm and dignified, while chaos swirled around her. But the storm that was coming was going to be unlike anything anyone on that flight could have imagined. If you think this story is intense now, you haven't seen anything yet. Make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next will leave you absolutely stunned. The revelation that's coming will change everything, and the justice that's about to be served, it's going to be absolutely perfect. The moment that changed everything was about to arrive. Up in the cockpit, Captain James Mitchell had been watching the entire confrontation unfold through the cabin security cameras, and what he saw made his blood boil. This veteran pilot with 30 years of experience had witnessed every type of passenger behavior imaginable, but blatant racism and harassment in his aircraft? That crossed a line he would never tolerate. Captain Mitchell stood up from his seat, straightened his uniform, and made a decision that would expose the truth and deliver justice in the most spectacular way possible. He was about to enter that cabin and change the lives of everyone involved forever. The cockpit door opened, and Captain James Mitchell stepped into the first-class cabin with the commanding presence that came from 3 decades of aviation authority. At 58 years old, he was an imposing figure in his crisp pilot's uniform, his expression stern and focused as he surveyed the chaotic scene before him. Victoria Sterling's face immediately lit up with relief and excitement when she saw the captain approaching. In her entitled mind, this was exactly what she had been waiting for. Finally, someone with real authority was coming to handle the situation and give her exactly what she wanted. "Captain," Victoria exclaimed, practically bouncing with anticipation. "Thank you for coming to handle this. I've been trying to resolve this situation, but this woman is being completely unreasonable." Victoria was so confident that the captain would automatically side with her that she didn't even notice the stern expression on his face or the way his jaw was set with barely controlled anger. She assumed that his authority would naturally align with her demands. Captain Mitchell looked directly at Victoria with the kind of steely gaze that had commanded respect in military operations and commercial aviation for decades. His voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable edge of authority. "What exactly is the problem here?" Captain Mitchell asked, his tone making it clear that he wanted facts, not dramatics. Victoria launched into her explanation with the breathless enthusiasm of someone who believed she was completely in the right. "This woman won't give my daughter the window seat," Victoria declared, gesturing dramatically toward Dr. Washington. "My daughter specifically requested the window seat, and this passenger is refusing to accommodate a simple request from a child." As Victoria spoke, Captain Mitchell's gaze moved to Dr. Washington, and something remarkable happened. Recognition flickered across his face. He had seen that face before, in business magazines, in news articles, in stories about successful entrepreneurs who had built empires from nothing. Captain Mitchell looked more closely at Dr. Washington, taking in her sophisticated appearance, her calm demeanor under pressure, and the quiet authority that radiated from her even in this hostile situation. He knew exactly who she was, and the realization of what he was witnessing made his expression harden with disgust. This wasn't just any passenger being harassed. This was Dr. Amelia Washington, one of the most successful businesswomen in America, being subjected to racist treatment by entitled passengers and an incompetent flight attendant. Dr. Washington, sensing the captain's recognition, reached into her briefcase and handed him her business card. The simple gesture carried more weight than all of Victoria's screaming and demands combined. Captain Mitchell took the card and read it aloud, his voice cutting through the cabin noise like a blade. "Dr. Amelia Washington, CEO Washington Enterprises, he announced, making sure everyone in the cabin could hear every word. The reaction was immediate and electric. Other passengers who recognized the name started whispering among themselves. The businessman in row 5 sat up straighter. The elderly couple in row 3 exchanged amazed glances. Even some of the passengers who didn't recognize the name could tell from the captain's tone that this was someone extremely important. But Victoria Sterling, in her absolute arrogance and ignorance, completely missed the significance of the moment. "I don't care what her business card says," Victoria snapped dismissively, waving her hand as if Dr. Washington's credentials were meaningless. "She still needs to give my daughter the window seat. Business cards don't change the fact that a child made a simple request." The audacity was breathtaking. Even after learning that she had been harassing a successful CEO, Victoria still believed that her daughter's wants were more important than Dr. Washington's rights. Her entitlement was so complete that she couldn't process the gravity of the situation. Captain Mitchell's voice dropped to a dangerous level as he addressed Victoria with the kind of controlled fury that came from witnessing something truly despicable. "Ma'am, you just discriminated against one of the most successful businesswomen in America," Captain Mitchell said, each word delivered with precision and weight. "You have subjected a respected passenger to racist harassment, and you have shown a complete disregard for basic human decency." But Chloe Sterling, the 14-year-old who had been raised to believe that her wants trumped everyone else's rights, was still completely confused about why any of this mattered. "So what? She still should move," Chloe said with the same smugness that had characterized her behavior throughout the entire confrontation. "I don't care if she's a CEO or whatever. I wanted the window seat first." The child's response revealed everything about how deeply the toxic attitudes had been ingrained. Even when faced with the reality of Dr. Washington's success and importance, Chloe still believed that being a privileged white teenager gave her automatic superiority over a black woman, regardless of that woman's accomplishments. Dr. Washington, who had maintained her composure throughout this entire ordeal, finally spoke with the calm authority of someone who had just watched her attackers destroy themselves completely. "And you both just showed your true character on camera," Dr. Washington said calmly, raising her hand to point around the cabin. The gesture was devastating in its simplicity, because as Dr. Washington pointed, everyone in the cabin became suddenly aware of just how many phones were recording, how many witnesses were documenting every moment of this confrontation. The businessman in row 5 was live streaming the entire incident. The elderly couple had been taking photos. Multiple passengers were recording video from different angles. Someone in the back was broadcasting to social media. This wasn't a private disagreement that could be covered up or explained away. This was a public humiliation that was being documented for the entire world to see. Victoria's face went white as she realized what Dr. Washington was pointing out. All of her racist comments, all of Chloe's entitled demands, all of their disgusting behavior had been captured on multiple devices and was probably already being uploaded to the internet. But the worst was yet to come. Captain Mitchell had seen enough, heard enough, and witnessed enough to make a decision that would change everything. "You and your daughter are being removed from this flight," Captain Mitchell announced, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who had complete control over the aircraft. Victoria's world collapsed in that moment. The entitled confidence that had carried her through the entire confrontation evaporated instantly, replaced by panic and desperation. "What? Over a seat disagreement?" Victoria stammered, her voice rising to a panicked pitch. "You can't be serious. This is just a misunderstanding about seating arrangements." But Captain Mitchell wasn't buying her attempt to minimize what had happened. He had witnessed the entire confrontation, heard the racist language, seen the harassment, and watched as his flight attendant enabled discrimination against a paying passenger. Over blatant racism and harassment of another passenger, Captain Mitchell corrected firmly. Your behavior has been completely unacceptable, and I will not tolerate discrimination on my aircraft. Chloe, finally beginning to understand that there might be real consequences for her actions, launched into the kind of desperate denial that revealed just how little she understood about the gravity of what she had done. "We're not racist. We just wanted the window seat," Chloe cried, her voice taking on a whining quality that made her sound even younger and more entitled than before. The claim was laughable. Everyone had heard the "your people" comments. Everyone had witnessed the assumption that Dr. Washington should automatically defer to white passengers. Everyone had seen the racist attitudes on full display. Chloe's denial only made the situation worse by showing that she still didn't understand why her behavior was wrong. Dr. Washington delivered the final blow with the kind of quiet dignity that had characterized her response throughout the entire ordeal. "The way you asked says everything about who you are," Dr. Washington said simply, her words carrying more power than all of Victoria's screaming and Chloe's tears combined. Those words cut through every excuse, every justification, every attempt to minimize what had happened. Because Dr. Washington was absolutely right. The way Victoria and Chloe had approached the situation, the language they had used, the assumptions they had made, the racist attitudes they had displayed, all of it revealed their true character for everyone to see. The turning point was complete. The privileged mother and daughter who had thought they could intimidate and harass their way to getting what they wanted had instead exposed themselves as racists in front of a cabin full of witnesses and cameras. The woman they had tried to humiliate and dismiss had revealed herself as one of the most powerful people on the plane. Captain Mitchell was already reaching for his radio to call for security. Dr. Washington sat calmly in her purchased seat, vindicated and dignified, and Victoria and Chloe Sterling were about to face consequences that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Have you ever witnessed this kind of blatant racism in public? Share your experience in the comments below. Hit the subscribe button and share this video with others if you're enjoying the story. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and Captain Mitchell wasn't finished delivering justice. His next target was the flight attendant who had enabled this discrimination and made the situation infinitely worse with her cowardly decision to side with the harassers. Rachel began crying, finally understanding that her career was over and that she had destroyed her own life by trying to appease people who never deserved accommodation in the first place. But Captain Mitchell had no sympathy for someone who had chosen the wrong side when it mattered most. Meanwhile, Victoria Sterling was spiraling into full panic mode as the reality of her situation began to sink in. The entitled confidence that had carried her through the entire confrontation was crumbling as she realized that this wasn't going to end with her getting what she wanted. "This is all a misunderstanding," Victoria cried desperately, her voice taking on a pleading quality that was completely different from the aggressive demands she had been making minutes earlier. "We never meant any harm. This whole thing has been blown out of proportion." But it was too late for damage control. The racist words had been spoken, the harassment had been witnessed, and the cameras had captured everything. Victoria's attempts to rewrite history were falling on deaf ears. Chloe Sterling, who had spent the entire flight recording other people and documenting what she thought was her victory, was now crying real tears as the magnitude of what she had done began to hit her 14-year-old mind. "Mom, everyone's recording us," Chloe wailed, looking around the cabin at all the phones pointed in their direction. "This is going to be all over the internet. My friends are going to see this." For the first time in the entire confrontation, Chloe was crying genuine tears, instead of the fake manipulation she had used earlier. But these weren't tears of remorse for her racist behavior. These were tears of fear about the consequences she was going to face. The irony was perfect. The social media-obsessed teenager who had been recording Dr. Washington to shame her was now terrified of being recorded herself. The girl who had wanted to document her victory was now panicking about the world seeing her true character. Captain Mitchell reached for his radio and made the call that would seal Victoria and Chloe's fate. "This is Captain Mitchell, requesting immediate security assistance in first class. I need 2 passengers removed from the aircraft for harassment and discrimination." Within minutes, airport security personnel were boarding the plane. These weren't regular airport staff. These were serious security officers who had been briefed on the situation and were prepared to handle 2 passengers who had committed harassment and created a disturbance. As the security officers approached, Victoria's desperation reached new heights. She dropped to her knees in the aisle, abandoning any pretense of dignity as she begged for mercy she didn't deserve. "Please, we're sorry. We didn't mean anything," Victoria pleaded, her voice breaking as she realized that her actions were going to have real consequences. "It was just a misunderstanding about seats. Please don't do this to us." But Dr. Washington, who had maintained her composure throughout this entire ordeal, delivered the response that cut through all of Victoria's lies and excuses with surgical precision. "You meant every word. And now the world will see who you really are," Dr. Washington said calmly, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had just witnessed justice being served. Those words were devastating because they were absolutely true. Victoria and Chloe had meant every racist comment, every entitled demand, every assumption about superiority. Their behavior hadn't been a misunderstanding or a mistake. It had been a window into their souls, and that window had revealed something ugly and hateful. The security officers began the process of escorting the mother and daughter off the plane, but first they had to secure evidence. One of the officers approached Chloe and held out his hand. "I need to take your phone as evidence of the incident," the security officer said firmly. Chloe's eyes went wide with horror. Her phone contained her entire digital life. Her social media accounts, her photos, her connections to her privileged world. Losing her phone felt like losing her identity. "You can't take my phone," Chloe cried, clutching the device to her chest. "That's my whole life." But the security officer wasn't interested in a teenager's attachment to her device. The phone contained evidence of the harassment, and it was being confiscated, whether Chloe liked it or not. As Victoria and Chloe were escorted down the aisle toward the aircraft door, the other passengers continued filming every moment. The businessman in row 5 kept his live stream running. The elderly couple documented the entire escort process. Multiple passengers captured different angles of the humiliating walk of shame. Victoria tried to cover her face, but it was impossible to hide from all the cameras. Chloe sobbed loudly, finally understanding that her actions were going to follow her forever. The entitled mother and daughter who had thought they could intimidate and harass their way to getting what they wanted were being removed from the plane in disgrace. As they reached the aircraft door, Captain Mitchell appeared one final time to deliver a personal message to Dr. Washington that everyone in the cabin could hear. "Dr. Washington, on behalf of the airline and every decent person on this aircraft, I sincerely apologize for what you were subjected to today," Captain Mitchell said, his voice carrying genuine respect and remorse. "Your dignity throughout this ordeal has been remarkable, and I want you to know that this behavior does not represent our values or our standards." Dr. Washington nodded graciously, accepting the apology with the same class and composure she had shown throughout the entire confrontation. She had won not just the immediate battle, but had done so while maintaining her dignity and exposing the true character of her attackers. But the story was far from over. In fact, the most devastating consequences for Victoria and Chloe Sterling were just beginning. Even before the aircraft door closed behind the expelled passengers, the viral explosion was already starting. The businessman who had been live streaming immediately posted his video with the caption, "Racist mother and daughter removed from flight for harassing successful black businesswoman." Within minutes, the video had hundreds of views. The elderly couple uploaded their photos to Facebook with a detailed description of what they had witnessed. Other passengers were posting to Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and every other social media platform they could access. The hashtag #WindowSeatRacism began trending within the first hour. Chloe's own social media accounts, which she had used to document her privileged lifestyle and had planned to use to shame Dr. Washington, were suddenly flooded with negative comments as people found her profiles and began calling her out for her racist behavior. "This, you being racist on a plane," one comment read. "Imagine being this entitled at 14, read another. "Your parents raised a racist and it shows," said a third. The comments kept coming, thousands of them, as people who had seen the videos tracked down Chloe's social media presence and held her accountable for her actions. But the viral explosion wasn't limited to social media. News outlets began picking up the story within hours. Local news stations in Atlanta and Chicago ran segments about the incident. National news programs started covering the story. Cable news channels began discussing the broader implications of racism in air travel. Victoria Sterling's name was being shared across every platform, tagged in every post, and associated with every discussion about modern racism and entitlement. The woman who had thought she could harass a black passenger with impunity was now the face of everything wrong with privileged white behavior. The story was spreading faster than Victoria could have imagined. Every major news website picked it up. Every social media platform was buzzing with discussions. Every comment section was filled with people expressing their disgust at Victoria and Chloe's behavior and their admiration for Dr. Washington's dignity. The viral explosion was complete, total, and devastating. Victoria Sterling had gotten exactly what she deserved: worldwide recognition for her true character. But she was about to discover that going viral for racism was just the beginning of her problems. The consequences that were coming would destroy her business, her reputation, and her entire way of life. If you think the justice served so far has been satisfying, wait until you see what happens when Victoria shows up to work the next morning and discovers exactly who she had been screaming at on that plane. The next morning arrived like a sledgehammer for Victoria Sterling. She had barely slept, watching her racist behavior spread across the internet like wildfire. Victoria dragged herself into Sterling marketing, looking like a woman who had aged 10 years overnight. Her secretary Jennifer looked up nervously. "Miss Sterling, there's someone here to see you about the Washington Enterprises contract." Victoria stopped dead. Washington Enterprises was their biggest potential client, the $50 million contract that would save her failing business. "That's our biggest potential client," she said, confused. "I wasn't expecting anyone today." Victoria walked toward the conference room, trying to summon professional confidence. She needed this meeting to go perfectly. Her company's future depended on impressing whoever was waiting inside. She pushed open the door and her world completely collapsed. Sitting calmly at the table was Dr. Amelia Washington. The same woman Victoria had screamed at and subjected to racist abuse was now in her conference room, holding Sterling Marketing's desperate proposals. Victoria's face went white. No, this can't be." "Surprise, Victoria. The CEO you've been desperately trying to impress," Dr. Washington said calmly. Victoria collapsed into a chair. You're the Dr. Washington?" The irony was devastating. For weeks, Victoria had been trying to meet this CEO, crafting proposals and making calls. When she finally met Dr. Washington face to face, she had subjected her to racist harassment. "The same Dr. Washington you and your daughter showed such disrespect to yesterday," Dr. Washington confirmed. Victoria began hyperventilating. "I had no idea. This is impossible. Sterling Marketing is hereby permanently blacklisted from any Washington Enterprises business," Dr. Washington announced with calm authority. "Please, my company will die without this contract." Victoria cried desperately. "Your company died the moment you showed who you really are," Dr. Washington replied. "Yesterday, you revealed your true character, and that character is incompatible with any business relationship." Dr. Washington stood up and delivered her final message. "You can't apologize your way out of showing the world who you really are. You chose racism. Now, you live with the consequences. Within hours, other clients began canceling contracts, horrified by the viral videos. By afternoon, Victoria had lost 3 major accounts. Within a month, Sterling Marketing closed permanently. Chloe was expelled from her private school. The family was forced to sell their house and move to a small apartment. Victoria couldn't find employment anywhere. Every potential employer Googled her name and found the viral videos. Years later, Chloe eventually learned from her experience and became an advocate for anti-racism education. Dr. Washington used her experience to inspire new airline policies protecting passengers from discrimination. Racism has consequences, Dr. Washington said in a televised interview. When people show you who they are, believe them. Sterling Marketing closed permanently, and Victoria Sterling filed for bankruptcy. The final image shows Dr. Washington working peacefully in her window seat on another flight, having maintained her dignity while watching justice unfold perfectly. Sometimes the most powerful response to racism is simply refusing to move from the seat you paid for and letting the racists destroy themselves with their own behavior. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and share with others so they can learn too. See you in our next video.